Welcome to Women Talkin Bout AI, where we explore the messy, meaningful intersections of technology, humanity, and everything in between. In today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Mathilde Cerioli, a cognitive neuroscientist, mom, and chief scientist at Everyone.AI. Mathilde is helping lead a global push to design AI that actually meets the developmental needs of children, not just the profit margins of tech companies. From bedtime deepfakes gone wrong to the neuroscience behind critical thinking and dopamine loops, we dig into how today's digital tools shape tomorrow's minds. Enjoy. Welcome, everyone, to Women Talkin Bout AI. Today, we're joined by Dr. Mathilde Cerioli, a leading voice at the intersection of neuroscience, child development, and artificial intelligence. As chief scientist at Everyone.AI, she's helping shape the future of ethical AI through a deep commitment to children's cognitive and emotional well-being. Dr. Cerioli leads the Beneficial AI for Children Coalition, a global effort bringing together policymakers, tech leaders, and advocates to center children's developmental needs in the design of emerging technologies. Whether she's advising governments, working with industry, or guiding families and educators, she brings a rare blend of scientific rigor and real-world wisdom. But before we get into the research, I want to share something from her LinkedIn profile that really struck me. And honestly, it sets the tone for today's conversation better than any formal bio could. She wrote, "When I was asked as a child what I wanted to do when I grew up, it was simple: play. Little did I know that this desire for playfulness would guide my journey to becoming a doctor in neuroscience and a repeat entrepreneur. Through a playful approach, I believe we can unlock the true power of creativity and find innovative ways to navigate the challenges we face." And that spirit of play, curiosity, and experimentation seems to run through everything Dr. Cerioli does, and it's something we'll be tapping into throughout this episode. Welcome, Dr. Cerioli. I'm going to just call you Mathilde.
Yes.
And let's just start by first, is there anything you need to correct about what I said? And then I want you to tell us about your first encounter with AI.
Yeah, no, that's a very great, flattering introduction. It leaves out a lot of the rest of the messiness of, being human, but it sounds great on paper. So thanks for
Yes.
that introduction. And the only thing I would change is that for the coalition, it's actually a lot of people leading that. So I have an amazing team at Everyone.AI, the nonprofit we run. And it's also co-led by the amazing team at the Paris Peace Forum, who's been involved in global diplomacy for years now.
Okay. And are you in Paris or are you in Montreal?
No, I'm in Silicon Valley.
Oh, you're in
I
are
did
you
my
okay.
PhD. So no, I'm from France. I did my PhD in Canada, but I've been in Silicon Valley now for over 12 years.
Okay. I guess I skipped that part of your LinkedIn profile
No,
because this was much more interesting. And it's something that I'm working on in my life is like more play, more just how can we make this joyful and fun? So yeah, like what do you remember as kind of the first time that AI or generative AI really caught your attention? Not like as a scientist, but just as a person. What was your kind of gut reaction?
I think I heard about AI working as a consultant with edtech companies. And they started saying like, oh, there's that cool thing that's generative AI that we can now use in our products. And so I approached it with a lot of curiosity. And this is amazing. We can do so much with it. We can improve interface, create complexity. And so, yeah, that was really the exciting part for me. And then the less exciting part was when I was hearing the ideas of let's use generative AI for this type of product. And that's when I started having concern of, people who are looking at how to use that do not really understand sometimes what a child needs to thrive. And so their ideas do not align. So I think the first time I heard one of those ideas was, let's create a podcast that will generate stories every night for a child by using the parent's voice as a deepfake. And I was like, this is so not a good idea. Like we can do great stuff with it, but like it's not what we should be doing with that technology. And I think that's where I had some concerns that were really following what I had experienced, where you have great product designer, great engineers, but sometimes they don't know enough about a child because that's not their expertise. But because they create a product for kids, there's some things they should know before. And that's kind of really like got us on that journey of learning more about AI. And on the personal level, like the first time I started interacting, I think the first time was probably with ChatGPT. I guess like many of us, I was like, whoa, what is that? What is that thing? What can it do? And just being really surprised at, like just really having fun with it of what works, what doesn't, being surprised sometimes at things that feel very easy for us and where AI gets it completely wrong. And on the opposite, sometimes like, whoa, it can do that in like 5 seconds and it would take me 3 hours. So I think there's a lot of that we've all experienced when we started playing around with it.
Yeah, yeah. I want to recap what you said first about I mean, lots of times on this podcast we have talked about like how it doesn't work when you want to use tech for the sake of tech.
Yeah.
It's like we are trying to force tech into something that's not even a real problem. I mean, it's not an existing human problem that kids
No.
need a podcast story at night. If their
Yes.
parents are there to read them a story, always that's going to be better. And we see this, I think this is a major kind of criticism of ed tech in general, is that
Yeah.
it's like tech for the sake of tech. But yeah, I also wanted to highlight that I've gotten really interested lately in the New York Times games that you can play, like Wordle and connections. Sometimes when I get frustrated and I only have one answer left, I want to cheat. So I've taken a screenshot of the game and uploaded it. You would think that a language model would be good at language, right? No, it's
Yeah.
terrible. It's terrible. So for anybody out there who's going to be a cheater like I am, doesn't work for Wordle or connections. I haven't tried the
Oh,
crossword, but yeah, it's at really a lot of things that humans are good at. Yeah.
and that's interesting that we can't help but try and use it sometimes to cheat. Like
Yeah.
we're like, well, it feels like it must have the answer and we've just really want it. So I understand also why in school teenagers want to use those technologies to gain sometimes a better answer. Like I think we're just inherently driven to succeed and have the right answer.
Yeah. Yes, of course. I mean, even after we are adults and we've already
Yeah.
achieved certain things, we still want the right answer. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, what I'm really interested in these days and want to talk about while we're fresh and have time for sure is the issue of how AI or really any digital tech used in childhood or beyond might affect the development of critical thinking skills. Because I hear people's concerns about that. They say, well, if it's doing all the writing and writing is thinking, then where's the thinking happening? So, what are your thoughts on that? And what kind of response from a neuroscience background do you have to that?
I mean, that's such a huge question. So let's go to just the neuroscience cognitive aspects of what is critical thinking so that we first have a clearer definition of what we're talking about, because I think that's one of the very popular words lately. This is the skill of the century. This is what we need to do well with AI. AI is going to threaten critical thinking. So let's go back to what it actually is. And so when you look a bit at the research of what this is, it's really our ability to think critically about what's around us, about ideas. And so what we need to be good critical thinker is first we need some specific cognitive skills. So some of those are, well, we need to reason just in general. We have to be able to make connections. Then we need to be able to have a good working memory, which is really our ability to keep in mind several information and think about those. Um, then we need to be able to inhibit some of our cognitive biases. So as humans, we have those kind of shortcuts that help us think fast, but that are not always the rational approach to things. So we need to be able to feel like, oh, it might feel logical to me, but is it actually? So having that ability to pause and really think about our thought process. That's one of the first part. The second thing is to think critically about a subject. Then we need to know a lot about that subject. You can't be a critical thinker about something you have no knowledge about. And it's actually interesting when you look at the literature. What we see is that you can be a great critical thinker on one topic where you have good knowledge and make very poor decision in another where you have very little knowledge. So that's something we really need is that knowledge basis. And the last one is metacognition. So our ability to think about our own thinking, to look at our thought process, see if it makes sense, make modifications on it. So that's kind of the core of what we need. And the way it develops is we get better at it. A lot of skills, we peak around, most of the development happens between 0 and 25 years of age. So we get better, we fine tune the skills. A lot of the skills for critical thinking, especially when it comes to inhibition, develops up till 25 years of age. So that's something we get much better later. And then, contrary to many skills where we kind of peak and then it goes worse, critical thinking is one of those skills that just gets better because as you age, you get more and more and more knowledge. So you have a wider area of expertise. So you actually improve. That's one of those skills that you're better at 50 than you were at 25, which is not the case for many of our cognitive skills. That's really that developmental approach. So when it comes to AI, there's different way that AI can either support critical thinking or can threaten it. And I think that's interesting to see where it can create short circuits in a way that will kind of decrease our ability. So can impact working memory, the level of distractions we have around us. Because to be able to think about something, you have to not have distractions around you to be really on task. So that's one of the things. The other issue is that sometimes with AI and more the machine learning and deep learning that we see in social media tends to create, those kind of echo chambers that reinforce our cognitive biases. So then it becomes harder to inhibit them. And what I often see is people are like, we don't need to learn as many things anymore because the information is there, so we can just access it on demand. So we don't need to learn things by heart, and we can just kind of go on the internet, find the elements or information we need to think about, which is really not the case. If you want to be critical thinker about something, you need to have a good understanding of things to be able to make connections between things. If you read 10 things, but you do not really memorize it, it's much harder to think about it. In essence, if you use AI to actually learn more, deepen your knowledge, challenge yourself, help you challenge also, like when you have a whole thought process, like challenge me, tell me what I might be missing, then that's kind of increasing and improving it. But if you're using it as a shortcut and be like, I have that question and I need the answer, that's actually going to go against you because, as you said, when we are writing, we're not just writing for the sake of writing. We are articulating our thoughts. You can really see that when you're like writing on complex topic, where you write and you rewrite and you rewrite until you get to the essence of your thinking. And that part, if you upload it to an AI, of course, you're not going to be able to have the same level of understanding and really deep connections you make between those ideas as someone who would have spent like 5 hours writing the same thing. So you might get the same result on paper, but not in your brain.
Right, right, right. Well, so what can parents and educators then do to sort of cultivate that kind of critical thinking early on? I mean, is it just a matter of like having the right prompt and teaching kids words like challenge me or, phrases that they can work into their prompts? Or the one that I always throw out is like, I always tell the generative AI, problematize my thinking. Don't just agree with me. Really help me counter argue against me and push back because I know that I I know. Well, I mean, I just want to approach everything critically because I know I need to challenge my assumptions. But when it comes to kids, this is where I don't specialize in that. My specialty is in writing when it comes to like, advanced graduate students and research writing and such. But what do you tell parents or educators for 0 to 25
Yes.
ages.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge bracket, but
Yeah.
what's your kind of go-to about, is this just a prompting skill or is there something more to it?
I think it is, there is a part that's a prompting skill. So I think going into the do not use AI or use AI for everything, there's a right balance to find. So it's more at what step of the process do you use AI and what information do you look for? First, like with very young kids, they don't need it because they are learning to write. So we want them to be able to write independently because it's also how you think independently. So there's an age for that. And I think it's an interesting parallel when you look at calculators when they were introduced in school. And I've seen that a lot. Many posts on LinkedIn who were kind of poking fun at that picture of teachers that were like marching in the street and saying like no calculators in the classroom. But what it actually said was no calculator in elementary classroom, which is a big distinction. Because when you're learning about numbers, having a calculator is not helping you. You need to be able to kind of have a good understanding of numbers and quantity. And for instance, if I say like 30 plus 22 plus 7 equals 19, you don't have to make the math. You know it's wrong because you have a good understanding of numbers and you kind of see it doesn't add up. So you need to kind of develop that skill before you can do anything more complex. So then having a calculator might get in the way of that. But once you're in high school and you're doing complex math, maybe it's not worth spending the time to add all of the number and make small mistake there where you're actually going to much abstract level. So I think it's really the same approach with those AI. Once a child is a good independent writer, using AI can actually help them get further. But when they are learning to write at a young age, there's no win. There's more like there's more risk really than benefits there. And at the same time, it depends what you're asking. You can have very simple approach to when they start writing longer text of what are the common spelling mistakes they make, what are the common grammar mistakes they make, so that you can have a good analysis with AI that could help you see like, oh, that child really didn't understand past tense. They always make the same mistake. Let's review the lesson. So there, like there's a potential, but it's not making them right. It's just improving some of the skills they need to write or helping identify actually what they might have missed in their education and learning. And then when it comes to older kids, then I think it's really teaching them how to prompt. So I like the idea of like, challenge me, tell me what I'm missing or what an expert in that field might say. Because that's actually really helping with critical thinking of holding different approach to a common problem, So I think there's a lot of potential, and that's something that needs to be taught in school. What is a good prompt and a bad one? And I think at that age, is that prompt helping you learn? Or is that prompt doing it for you? If it's doing it for you, it's not doing you any good, basically. So, and I think that's going to be difficult because our education system is really based on the results. Is it the right answer or the wrong answer? And for that, AI is better. So I also feel a lot of compassion for students and even college students because, like, am I going to spend 5 hours on that? And I know that because that's not a topic I'm familiar with, an AI is going to do better in 2 minutes. Like, it really feels like a lost battle if what you're looking at is the results. But if you're looking at the process of everything you're learning while you're doing that, then it becomes a whole different story. And even the incentive of how do I use AI becomes different. How do we push that more intrinsic motivation of I'm learning because I want to know about that topic compared to I'm in school because I want that grade. So, and I think that's where the conversation and the approach to education needs to shift a bit.
Yeah. And, writing teachers have been talking about this for years. We have always emphasized product over process. And boy, nothing makes an undergraduate student more angry than when I say, I'm less worried about the final deliverable thing you're going to show me than I am about watching it develop over time. And they're like, what's my grade? They just want the final grade. They want to check the box and move on. I just said to someone the other day, I was like, how do we polish up the idea of struggle? Like, struggle is really where learning happens. And it doesn't matter what level you are. If I'm teaching adults English, which I did for a decade of my life, they would often prompt me for the right answer rather than sitting with their kind of less proficient colleagues, and I would encourage them to talk,
Yeah.
and they would say, "But you have the right answer. Why would I wanna talk to them?" And I was like, "Because the struggle is the gold in learning.
Yeah.
That's where you learn." But that's a hard sell for
Yeah, but
especially
I
adults.
feel maybe it's how we push it at school from the beginning with kids. It's like if you're
Mhm.
not struggling, you're not learning. So if you're doing too well in my class, that's not a good news. Like
Mhm.
you don't want a kid that has straight A. It means like it's too easy. You want to challenge them. And that's really interesting. So I did my whole education in France where it's over there, it's too much but where you never get perfect grades. It's very, very rare, especially like I think in math is one of the topic you can have perfect grade. But most of the time, if it's writing and you get 75%, like that's really good. Because the expectation is perfection and you're never gonna be perfect. So like your text is never gonna be Shakespeare. So if that's the bar, then 75% is good. And so I remember the first time I graded paper in Canada, the department actually asked me like, what's going on? Did they all mess up? And I was like, no, they're great. And I was grading PhD student papers. So they were all amazing students. But my expectation was perfection. And so they had a lot of 80, 85. And they were like, that's too low. If the idea is like, do they have the knowledge for that age? Then yes, they completely deserve to have much closer to 95, 100%.
Mhm.
But I kind of see that if you're expected to get straight A's, then you're going to focus much more on the result, I think. Because then that becomes the expectation, and less than that feels like you didn't do good enough. So you're going to go for things that are more easy as well, because your goal is to keep the perfect grade and to keep on subjects you know well, where you know you're going to do good. Where if you have to take a second language, you might pick one that you already know how to speak, because then it's a guarantee for better grades. I think that's where we kind of have to put more incentive on really like the process, especially in the age of AI, where the process is everything over the outcome.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, I wanna shift now, but first, I want to see if I can recap. So, we talked about
Mhm.
critical thinking. You gave us a good definition of critical thinking, what that means, what we have to keep in mind. I won't try to re express what you did so eloquently. And then we talked a little bit about like, what does this look like in practice? And I think that the takeaway there is like shifting the narrative to the process and away from the product, and really kind of emphasizing that learning is about struggle, and it doesn't always feel good. And yeah, I
Mhm.
hear a lot of people, you know, questioning what are our assessment methods and do work for us? Are they effective anymore when we have this machine that
Yeah.
can get us the answer? Yeah, so the shift of focus is really key, I think there.
Yeah, but and I'll add to the struggle part is like while you're learning, it doesn't feel great sometimes because you feel like you're not there. But once you learned, it does feel amazing. And I think it kind of goes back. I'll go more to the neuroscience of it. But we know that what feels rewarding in our brain is dopamine. So when we create even edtech products that give a lot of reward for having the right answer, and most of the time it's on the results that is being emphasized, you get short dopamine. Like you get like after 5, 10 minutes of engaging, you get dopamine right away. So you kind of take away the struggle, but you also take away the long-term motivation, and where you see children who move from wanting to learn the thing to wanting to get the points. So instead of increasing and encouraging that intrinsic motivation, I want to learn because I want to know, you move to I want the points. And so you're moving the focus away from the learning, which is really the opposite of what we want to do. So that's where it's interesting to see how can we keep some of that reward that takes longer. And it's really the same thing as I feel a bit down. Am I going to go for a walk and I'll get dopamine for that? But 15 minutes of walking. So it takes a while. Or am I picking up my phone and I get dopamine within 1 minute? So I get very short-term reward that feels good, but that not in a way, I would say like high quality, because I'm going to be left wanting more. Whereas like when you work longer toward a goal, when you get that reward, it's actually much bigger spikes. So you want to do that more, but you have to engage for a while before you get there. So it's harder to want to do it because first you have to go through that phase that doesn't feel that good.
Yeah, I'm always telling PhD students, the purpose of this is not the assignment that you have to turn in. It's not the dissertation. And they're like, what do you mean it's not the dissertation? And I'm like, because the purpose of all this is to become an expert, is developing expertise. It's not to finish that long paper. So yeah, at every level of education, that's a real issue. And actually, this kind of is a perfect segue to what I want to talk about next, which is kind of how the attention economy
Yeah.
and the impact on young brains. You know, I have a teen son, and boy, that cell phone, I mean, it's really hard to get him to focus on what he needs to do because of these short videos. You know, how does this environment affect cognitive development and attention span? And is AI in any way going to intervene in that and you know, help it, or is it going to make it worse? Like, what are your thoughts about this idea of attention?
Well, for now, AI, so the part like machine learning, deep learning has not helped at all. It's kind of done the opposite because it's just been creating a lot of distractions. So the there's no like complete consensus in the literature of the impact of digital media on attention because we lack longitudinal studies and they're hard to get because now everyone has a phone. So uh, you don't really have a good control group that doesn't have one. But what we see is when we see teenagers who start using a phone and we compare them to some who don't, we see a decrease in attention span, which once you take the phone away, where you do the opposite study where you're like, okay, we are going to remove phone and see how that evolves, you see that they pick it up. So it's more, it seems that the distraction is a huge part of the issue because we always have notification and we can't multitask. So attention is really like kind of, you can feel of it as a monocular. So you're really there. And if you're looking there, you're not looking there anymore. So you have to re-engage. And that process of getting your attention back and forth is really difficult. And often then you might get a notification. You go on your phone, and then what happens? There's that video, and then there's another, and then there's another. And so you disengage your attention for so long that when you come back to what you were doing, you don't even remember where you were anymore. And that back and forth is really taxing. That's causing like fatigue. Avoiding notification, I guess for parents, the first thing is like, if they have to do some homework or complex work, like get the phone away. Get it in another room. And it's still like, that's what's interesting is we are all very different. So they did experiments where they said, let's lower the level of notification. Let's badge them to 3 times a day rather than all the time and constantly. And so for some teens, it really helped and it actually decreased their anxiety level and stress level. But for some, it did the complete opposite because some of those adolescents have a higher fear of missing out. And so for them, what it led to was constant checking because all of a sudden they didn't know if, like if you don't see the number, for instance, of WhatsApp, then they would open WhatsApp to see if there was a message. So you kind of have to also go have what feels good, what's the right balance for you personally. But that's how much it's also like impacting us. So like you would see like a spike in anxiety for them because they were like, maybe something is happening and I don't know. And when you see that on average, they receive over 200 notifications a day, that's so many distractions. So avoiding that and kind of pushing back the age where they get access to a phone, of course, is going to be helpful for that. And at the same time, we live in a world where if they don't have access to a phone, it might also become isolating because then they're the only one that are not aware of what's going on. So it's a very complex balance to find as parents. And the other thing I would say on attention that I think is an easy win, no matter like, does your kid have a phone or not? Do you want them to have one or not? What seemed to work across the board is not having phone access after 9 p.m. in the bedroom. That was making a big difference because one of the things that short-term impacts attention is the level of sleep you get. And we all know that. Like when we are exhausted, we can see that we can't focus. It's really hard. We get distracted. It feels like we don't have the energy. And it's the same for teens when they lack sleep. And they still need a good 10 to 12 hours of sleep. So they need to sleep a lot at that age because they're going through a lot. Their brain is going through a lot. So when you remove the phone, you remove the distraction, the thing that will keep them on longer, and they just go to bed earlier. They fall asleep earlier. So that's the minimum easy thing to do, is not allowing late night use of phone. And some studies actually looked at when the kids use phone, and some kids will say they will wake up voluntarily at 1 or 2 a.m. to check their phone to see whether or not there's been messages. So it also becomes kind of a systemic problem because if all your kids' friends are talking at 11 p.m., well, they're out of the loop. So having conversation as parents and as a community around, let's agree to have phones removed from the bedroom at 9 p.m. makes it much easier because all of a sudden they're not missing out on anything. Their friends are not using it either. So we can work on an individual side, but having broader conversation helps. And teenagers are not a good reliable source. If you ask them, all their friends have a phone, all their friends have social media. And then sometimes you talk to parents and you're like, oh, actually one of them. So, and then all parents are like, okay, they're missing out. So I guess we'll do like the rest of them. And they kind of have that kind of impact of all of a sudden everyone has a phone. And at the beginning, no parents wanted them. So that's where having those conversations as a parenting community is important too.
Oh, I love that so much because that is my real life right now.
Yeah.
My son is convinced he's the only one that has to put his phone up outside of his bedroom at a certain time at night. And, it's ruining his life. It really is what he
Yeah.
says. I don't believe him that everybody else's parents are doing this, but, I mean, you've lived in the US for a while now. You know that we have this value of individualism and we don't
Yeah.
want to tromp on anybody's rights to have their own whatever. But what I want to do is reach out to other moms and say, hey, can we just agree in our little friend group right here
Yeah.
to put the phones away so that we all have the same? Because we've done it for other things, but less daily, kind of rule.
Yeah.
But I just don't know. I mean, in the US, it's almost like taboo to focus on a communal decision rather than an individual rights
And
decision.
I think it's also how you approach that conversation. It's not like, this is what you should do. It's more like,
Right.
you know what? Like, that's what we've put in place in our house because I've seen that it seems to be good for their attention and that it's a good compromise between them having a phone and limiting some of the risk of having a phone. And that's what we're doing. And I'm just curious, like, what's your take on this? How do you feel? Like, is it something that you're open to, or you're like, yeah, no, we don't want to do that? And it's more like, not like, it's more approaching an open conversation of how do you feel about that? And some parents might be like, okay, that's a good idea. Let's try it for a week too. And some will be like, you know what? They do what they want. I want them to be independent. And I consider that's their own thing. And then that's fine. But at least it's opening the conversation because what might be happening is in that friend group, 7 are thinking they want to do that and they think they're on their own. wanting to do that and just having the conversation, you would be like, oh, you too. I've seen that as more of a European in the US, even with younger kids, where I think it's very cultural sometimes, where I would come with a subject of, I was so tired and I couldn't do it anymore. I was so frustrated. And people would be like, oh, you feel like that too? I was like, yeah. Like, so I would see like French mom conversation that were like, oh, I'm exhausted and this is so hard. I would not see as much like openness about like, oh, this is my reality. And it doesn't have to be like, are you feeling like that too? But at least just having that conversation and then realizing like, oh, we are all alone thinking the exact same thing. And maybe not, but I think it's actually worth having that conversation.
Yeah. Well, this is very inspiring. Mom friends, look out if you're listening to this. Yeah. That's true. That's very true. When I became a parent, I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this is so hard and nobody is talking about how hard it is. And I had
Yes.
one friend who was open enough to talk to me about it. I think we're afraid that if we say it's hard, people will think we're not grateful or,
Yeah.
something, there's some judgment. There's something
Yeah.
we're afraid of there. But really, I've had over the years, I just kind of say, well, even if you know me, I just kind of say whatever I think, and that gets me in
Yeah.
trouble sometimes. But yeah, people have thanked me like, oh my gosh, thank you for normalizing,
Yeah.
the fact that I can't go to mommy and me because I've got this kid who can't sit still or who,
Yeah.
yeah. And I've just seen moms like in tears. And whenever I see that, I'm like, look, I know it's really hard.
Yeah.
It's
No,
really hard.
and it feels validating too. And I think parenting right now with technology is really hard. Like my
Mhm.
oldest is 12, and I'm getting in those conversations where even 2 years ago, it was like, yeah, that's how you approach it. And then you have your own teen and you're like, oh, that's actually like, it's like people giving you advice before they have kids and then they have their own kids. And I think with teenagers, it's kind of the same. You can be like, yeah, we'll do it this way. And then you have your own and you're like, oh, okay, theory is great. And practice is very different. It's very fun and it's very challenging.
Yeah, that's true. And that actually goes back to something I was going to say earlier about when I had asked you for something and you said, well, the science is really kind of unclear because we don't have a good control group. And I think this idea of what in theory should be an easy question to answer and what is actually the case in scientific findings is really hard for the
Yes.
public to stomach that. They
Yeah.
want an answer. They don't like the fact that actually science is this gray thing in between black and white. We do our best, with we have, and then we have all these other intervening variables happening, and it's just not possible to get a one correct answer.
It's really, I think, that study on should you batch notification or not? Well, it depends on your kid.
That's right. Yeah.
There's so many inter-individual factors where we are all different. And so what might be a good decision for one child might not be for another. And I think that's where having open conversation of this is what we're doing. Maybe some parents need to put some guardrails in place and some might not need because naturally their kids don't care. Like I have a child, like if a screen is around, they will pick it up every time. And I have another one who could not care less because that's just not something she enjoys. So with her, the rules are different. So even within the same siblings, within the same family, you can see how different they are. And so what you need to do as a parent might look completely different.
Yeah, it really depends on the kid, and you have to know your kid, and that's really hard for a kid to understand. If they have any sort of non-neurotypical tendency,
Yeah.
I've tried to say like, well, your brain is not like your friend's brain,
Yes.
Everybody has to have different rules for themselves because of our personalities, because of the way our brains work or don't quite work like others. And so, yeah, it's been really challenging for us. And I
Yeah.
think it's very personalized. There is one thing I want to make sure we hit, which I don't think is different for lots of different groups, and that is it's so important to build resilience to misinformation and to help people understand why misinformation happens and kind of get them equipped to discern the truth. My mom asked me about this the other day. And so I'm thinking across all age groups, like she said, how do you know if something pops up on my phone? How do I know if it's real or not? And I said, how much time do you have?
Yeah.
I mean, because we teach that in digital literacy now in high school and college classes, maybe in middle school too. But for older people, they didn't go through that. That wasn't part of their education.
No.
So I do have concern for older people. And I also have concern for younger people who may dismiss things or who may come to see a certain YouTube channel, for example, as an all knowing thing, or AI as this all knowing, amazing power, when really it's just a machine making
Yes.
predictions and connections. So, yeah, like at what age do you think it's important to start teaching kids about that? And how do you approach it?
I think it's a big question. I think there's several aspects to it. And I think the first one is, yes, AI literacy. We talk about it. The earlier they understand what AI is and what AI isn't, I think it's just really helpful, because then that's just how they consider the words. One of the things that I see often is people are like, oh, but you can see the difference because there's hallucination. And I always stay away from that, because I'm like, it's what is the case now might not be the case in 3 days or in 3 weeks. It's going so fast that I think we need to raise the standard of, let's take as a principle that you can't tell the difference on an image or on a text or on a voice. Because if it's not there yet, it will be in a matter of time. So I think it's very deceiving if we tell kids like, oh, but it will put 6 fingers. Look at that image. And so you can see that it's a deepfake. Because
Yeah.
then it's giving a sense of security. No, it's looking perfect and it looks like a real image. So that's not how you make the difference. I think the first one is kind of teaching them like, if it feels weird and doesn't make much sense, or is very surprising, check the sources, check if that's something that you see in one news channel, in every news channel. What are the reference to that? So that's why I'm actually like, I feel like we need to teach like research in a way much earlier. I think the research process, the PhD process, is really about that. It's about making the difference between good data and poor data, shortcuts, conclusion, or deep thoughts. I think that approach that you learn there should be taught much earlier. Of just even that the habit of, if you write anything, cite your sources, is something that I think is really important. Even when they're doing some research work in class, I think that we should teach from elementary age. If they're writing anything, they have to put down the reference. I think those things kind of just help frame how you see information and how you value quality of the information. So I think that's one of the easy first step to put in place. And I know that more and more people should think of having a security question within a family. If you receive a phone call, and we've seen a spike of phone calls with deepfakes, it takes about 15 seconds of your voice to be able to create a good deepfake of you. So, and it will often be about asking money. Older people are more targeted because they are less aware. So if you have your child that's over the phone crying and was like, Mom, I was just in a car accident. Can you send me the money to that number? It's playing on that kind of like fear. So where you're just going to be like, if there's any chance, and it's really hard. Like, let's say like you feel like your child is calling you with that kind of struggle. Are you going to be like, well, are you a deep fake person? Because on the off chance that it's not the case, you want to act fast. So it's really hard. So having a safety word or a question where you can really check, is the person, and it can be really fast. It can be like, what's our safe word? And pick something that's silly that no one else can know. Then you can skip the whole conversation about, are you a fake chatbot, or are you actually my child or my family member? So those things we can start thinking about, and if you have older people in your family, that's a good safety measure to put in place, so that in case of scam, and there's really been an uptake in scams, that's something you want to put ahead of time, not once it happened and they've been through it, and now you're like, oh, we need a safe word. Like, let's put that in place ahead, because that might happen. So that's one of the easy thing that we can put in place in family and with our kids as well. But on a more like even philosophical level, I wonder how will that shape our kids to know that what they see, they have to question all the time. Like, I really wonder, how does that play in your trust in the world? I have no idea. We don't have studies on that, but I'm really curious. The importance of that and the impact. But I guess it also puts back the importance of real connection, of being in the same room as people, as being together, because then that's something you can trust, the person that's right in front of you, that you're interacting with, because you know it's real. So maybe that's also part of the solution, which will be which we know is good for us human. We need to be social, we need to be in groups, and that's also one of the worry in the scientific community right now, is people engaging more and more with AI chatbots, creating a relationship with those chatbots. When you look at, I think Replica now has 30 million users across the world. It's 28 millions for Characters AI. So those platforms are really selling you a chatbot friend, a chatbot companion, a chatbot relationship. So it's not an isolated, it's not like a few people who are turning to chatbots. It's actually many people, and they look for very different things with those chatbots. But I think those human to human connections are crucial. And that's where, when people are like, what should AI do and what shouldn't it do? Um, shouldn't be your friends. Like, a friend is, even when you go back to the definition, it's a reciprocal relationship. There's no reciprocity with an AI. It's not there. Like, there's not someone behind the screen talking to you. And because we're human and we are primed for connection, like, it's something that's really reinforced in our evolution. Talking to an AI is going to be very addictive, because it's very rewarding in the brain. We will get a lot of dopamine for talking to an AI. And on top of that, it's going to be great interaction, because it's going to be so flattering. It's going to be telling us what we want. We're going to be the center of it. And we like being the center of it. It's very rewarding too. So there is a big attraction to those kind of interaction. But when we're in a group, when we're with people, we don't have only dopamine for being with them. We also have oxytocin, which is really that bonding trust hormone. And it's a hard hormone to study, so we don't have that many elements on it. But what we see is that you have much higher level when you're in person with voice, very little when you're chatting. So if you're chatting with someone, you can be chatting with 20 people, your 10 best friend, and you can still feel very lonely, because you will have very low level of oxytocin compared to a real physical interaction with someone. And so those AI companions and chatbots right now cannot offer that level of bonding that we need for well-being, because oxytocin actually really helps decrease stress levels. So that's why when we feel dysregulated, where we feel sad, having that big hug feels so good. It's because it's really giving you that like that release, that relief. And so we need to really protect in this way the connections between humans, which will be important, because that's something you can trust. The person in the room that's with you is with you. It's not a deepfake. It's not a false information. So maybe it's a chance also to center what is actually important to us back
Yeah. Oh, there's so much in there. I want to just
Yeah.
quickly recap
Yes.
a few things that I heard. One is hallucinations. If you don't know that word, hallucination or confabulation is another way to say that generative AI systems just make up things. And it might not be 100% fault. It could just be like on the spectrum of not quite true. It doesn't have to be just something that you immediately recognize. And then you talked about images. I do think it's easier if you're teaching kids to recognize misinformation or hallucination or whatever you want to call it. I do think it's easier with an image than with text.
Mhm.
I have a lot of friends who teach writing, and they start with pictures. You know, what can you see in this picture that isn't quite right? And then they move to text because our brains just, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I think that's really important. And then the other thing I want to say again, just in case anybody missed it, is because of the issue of deep fakes, which is like when your voice or even your video can be created by an artificially intelligent system. It looks like you, it sounds like you. To protect your loved ones and yourself, it's good to have a safe word that you and only your family members know, so that in a moment where you're worried, you just say, "What's our safe word?" instead of, "Are you a deep fake?" or, "Is this real?" Because it will be an emergency sounding situation.
Mhm.
That's how they work. And I don't remember what the third thing was. So there were 3 things I wanted to point out, but, yeah, I don't remember what the third one was. Um, Maybe I'll do a recap, later, and all of this will be in the show notes.
Yes.
Well, I'm just looking at the time. I have so many
Yes.
questions. Y'all should see I don't know how many pages of notes. I think I put together 6 pages of notes,
Yeah.
um, for this interview because I had so much I wanted to ask you about. Um, but let's go ahead. So, usually we end our sessions, our interviews with our pits and our peaches. But I want to like ask you a targeted question about something peachy in your life. Um, Given everything that you know about like child development and brain development and tech and development, what gives you hope right now?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think it's the fact that I see many people passionate about wanting to create an ethical future, about wanting to ask questions, and about the fact that um, we are far ahead enough in the digital media space that we know that our use of digital tech impacts who we are, how we are with others. So there's good lessons there, and there's a lot of people with the advent of generative AI where I hope we're mature enough that we are aware we need to really think through our decisions on the products we launch, of the word we create with that generative AI. So I see a lot of people who are motivated, who want to make a difference. I see people in tech companies that also want to do that work, who want to create something that's going to be good for humanity in general. So that part is kind of the more optimistic part, I guess.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and that's pretty much a perfect way to end, on a note of inspiration that is also grounded in expert insight, because it really summarizes the broader relevance of caring about human development in an AI world for all of us, no matter what age we are. So, yeah, well, is there anything you want to add that you feel like you wanted to say that we didn't get to talk about?
Oh, well, I could talk for hours. So, no, but I do think, especially for parents, I think it's having those open conversation with their kids, approaching their use of technology with curiosity. And I know how hard it is because I'm a parent myself, where we have so many of our fears that drive our conversation, where we feel we are having a discussion, but we are actually giving lectures. And I'm the first one guilty of that. I often will give a lecture and then come back and be like, okay, I'm sorry. Let's have a discussions now. But I think those are important. Like, why do you want to use a phone? When does it feel good to you? What are the things that you actually do not enjoy? Because I think if it's an open conversation, then they have the space to share the good and the bad. Whereas if we approach it always as a lecture, if there's bad, they won't share it because they will feel like we're looking for any excuse to remove the phone, to remove screens. And so then they don't really have that space where they can share their worries or what they didn't like. So I think as much as we can, just remaining curious about their digital life and approaching it by trying to leave our fears in a box, then we can get back to them. But to have that discussion with them, I think it's really important to just really take a deep breath before have those conversations when we feel like we're in a good space, so that we get to really learn what it's like for them, what they do on that, what are their way they use it in a very cool ways, and where they have the freedom to also share when maybe that was not the best idea or maybe that wasn't the best use. But I think it's really uh, where we can also have a lot of that connection back, because screens and tech create a lot of divisions in family. It's one of the biggest topic of conflicts when you look at surveys that are done in families. And I think a lot of it is because we're concerned as parents, and it's very a difficult environment to navigate. So yes, I think that that would be my message, to approach them with curiosity.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for taking time to do this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I actually would love to have you back sometime.
Sure.
We talk about maybe some more specific things. I feel like we hit some general topics, but I'm sure. And I even thought later, I was like, oh, what would be great is for me to have parents write in with questions.
Yes.
And then have like a Q&A session. So maybe that's a teaser for a future. But don't hold me to it, because I have
No,
a
no, I
lot
would
of
love
ideas.
that.
I think that would be a wonderful way to like get the community involved, like you said, because that is something that I'm thinking about more and more as I age, is like, where is my community and how can I get involved more with them, be of service, and offer, crowdsource answers to really hard
Yes.
questions that I don't know how to answer.
Same.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much,
Thank you so
Mathilde. It was
much.
lovely to have you.
Thanks.